When I opened the envelope from the HOA, I thought it was a joke. They fined me for hunting on my own land. They called it a community disturbance. What they didn't realize was that the trail they loved hiking every weekend wasn't theirs to begin with. And I was done being quiet. The woods were Daniel Miller's church. Quiet, honest, untouched. Every morning before sunrise, he'd pour a cup of black coffee, sling his old rifle over his shoulder, and step into the kind of silence that heals more than it hides. The air out there carried no judgment, no noise, no politics, just breath and birdsong. Daniel wasn't some trigger-happy hunter. He was a man who understood nature's balance. After 20 years of military service, he'd moved to the edge of the county to start over. One small house, 10 acres of peace, and a promise to himself never to bother anyone. He hunted for food, not trophies. He fixed his own fences, paid every tax, and minded his business. Neighbors liked him well enough, though few knew him well. He was the kind who nodded instead of waved, who helped fix a tire then disappeared before anyone could say thanks. When the HOA built new homes near his property line, he didn't complain. Everyone needs a place, he'd said, but peace has a funny way of testing those who cherish it most. The first letter came folded neat in his mailbox. A bright white envelope with the HOA seal in gold. Noise complaint. It read, followed by a fine. For what? Hunting. Daniel read it twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. His land wasn't inside the HOA's jurisdiction. He'd made sure of that years ago. Still, the words stared back like a challenge. He set the letter on the table, the paper trembling slightly in the breeze from the open window. Outside, the forest waited, quiet, loyal, unchanged. Daniel took a slow breath and whispered, almost to himself, "Guess peace doesn't come cheap anymore." It started with the fine. Then came the visits. 2 HOA board members showed up one Saturday morning while Daniel was cleaning his truck. A woman in designer sunglasses and a man holding a clipboard stood at the end of his gravel driveway. "Mr. Miller," the woman said curtly, "we've received multiple complaints about you discharging firearms near the community." Daniel leaned on his tailgate. "Ma'am, I hunt on my own land. Legally." She smiled like a teacher correcting a child. "The community feels unsafe. You're disturbing the peace." "The deer don't seem to mind," Daniel replied dryly. Her expression tightened. "You'll be fined again if this continues." They handed him another letter and left without waiting for a word. A week later, he found a sign hammered into the edge of his property. "No hunting beyond this point. HOA jurisdiction." That was the first time Daniel's patience cracked. He pulled the sign out of the ground, tossed it into the back of his truck, and drove straight to the HOA office. Inside, the president, Janet, sat behind a glossy desk like she owned the county. "Mr. Miller, we can't have gunfire near residents," she said without looking up. "I'm a mile away from your homes," Daniel replied. "And this?" He held up his deed. "Isn't your land." Janet leaned back, smirking. "You can take that up with the board, but our community standards apply to everyone nearby. It's for the greater good." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Lady, I served 20 years protecting freedom. You don't get to fine me for living it." She smiled coldly. "You'll hear from our attorney." He walked out without another word, but something in his eyes had changed. The quiet soldier had just been challenged. Weeks passed, each one with new letters, new threats. The HOA claimed his hunting violated the safety ordinance, even suggesting they could restrict his use of firearms permanently. They'd started something they didn't understand. At the next community meeting, Daniel decided to show up. The room was full of polished shoes and fake smiles. Janet stood at the front, reading from a paper. "Mr. Miller's behavior represents a risk to community tranquility," she announced. Daniel waited until she finished, then stood. "You talk about peace like it's a rule. I live it like it's a promise. There's a difference." A few people clapped quietly, but Janet raised her voice. "Sir, you don't belong in this meeting. You're not part of this community." He looked at her, calm as still water. "Not yet," he said, then walked out. That night, Sitting at his kitchen table, Daniel stared at the folder of property documents he'd kept for years. The HOA had pushed him too far. Not with the fines, but with the arrogance. He whispered to himself, "You want to play with land rights? Fine. Let's see who really owns this dirt." Under the pale glow of his desk lamp, Daniel unfolded a large county map. His property lines stretched farther than the HOA's new development. But something caught his eye. A dotted path labeled Community Hiking Trail Public Easement, pending. He frowned, checking the coordinates. The trail the HOA bragged about in every newsletter, the one they used for weekend hikes and nature photos, cut directly across his land. Daniel's lips curved into a slow grin. He drove to the county office the next morning and met the land registrar, an old friend named Henry. "Need to confirm a boundary," Daniel said, sliding the file across the counter. Henry adjusted his glasses, looked it over, then chuckled. "Well, I'll be damned. They've been using your land for years. It's fully yours, clear as daylight." Daniel nodded slowly. "Can I revoke access?" Henry smiled. "You sure can. Legally and cleanly." By the time Daniel left the office, his plan was already forming, quiet, methodical, legal. The kind of plan built not out of anger, but out of principle. That night, under the fading orange sky, he walked the trail himself, past the benches and signs the HOA had proudly installed. He stopped where the path met his fence line and whispered, "You find me for hunting on my land. Let's see how you like hiking on it." Took a week. Daniel filed the paperwork to terminate trail access, paid the fees, and waited for official approval. When it arrived, he smiled for the first time in months. Saturday morning, while the HOA was setting up for their community hike and barbecue, Daniel was in the woods, drilling holes, setting posts, hanging signs. By noon, he was done. A brand new steel gate blocked the trail entrance, wrapped in a heavy chain. A bright red sign read, "Private property, no trespassing, access revoked." When the first group of hikers arrived, they stopped in confusion. One man tugged the lock. Another pointed to the notice nailed beside it. "Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted under state trespass law." The HOA phones lit up within minutes. Emails poured in. Angry neighbors marched to Daniel's porch, shouting about their community rights. Daniel stepped outside, calm as ever, holding a copy of the deed. "This land's mine," he said. "Always has been. You wanted peace? Enjoy it from your side." They threatened lawsuits. They called the police. The officers checked the paperwork, then shrugged. "He's within his rights," they said, tipping their hats before driving off. The next day, Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, watching from a distance as Janet stood at the locked gate, red-faced and furious. He just smiled and muttered, "That's one fine I'll happily pay." The HOA called an emergency meeting that week. Panic filled the room. The community trail had been their selling point for new homes, now gone. Janet tried to spin it. "We'll sue him. He can't just close it." Their lawyer shook his head. "He owns it outright. Every inch. The county records are clear. You might want to start printing new brochures." Daniel didn't attend that meeting, but he didn't need to. The next morning, the HOA's website quietly removed all mentions of the trail. The new marketing slogan changed from "Nature at your doorstep" to "Peaceful living near the woods." A few weeks later, Daniel received a letter in the mail again. This one was different. It was an apology. "We regret any misunderstanding and hope for positive community relations." He folded it neatly, tossed it into the fireplace, and let it burn. Days later, he saw Janet in town. She tried to look composed, but her eyes betrayed frustration. "You really had to close it, didn't you?" she said. Daniel smiled politely. "Just following the rules. The ones you're so fond of." That was the last time she ever spoke to him. Months later, the trail grew quiet, grass reclaiming the dirt path where families once walked. Birds returned. Deer wandered freely again. Daniel's land was his sanctuary once more. He hunted when he pleased, cleaned his rifle after every season, and enjoyed the kind of peace he'd fought for all his life. The HOA elected a new president, a younger man who stopped by once to shake Daniel's hand. "We're hoping to keep things neighborly," he said. Daniel nodded. "Good fences make good neighbors." He returned to his porch, sat back with his coffee, and watched the sun rise through the trees. His revenge had never been loud. It didn't need to be. Sometimes silence makes the strongest point. Some people build fences to keep others out. His voice narrated softly. But sometimes, a fence is just a reminder. Respect works both ways.